Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Lekuyan Ila, and this is your week in a brief. Now, on Monday, we looked at the Kenya's economy and we were discussing with one Stella Swakei on why are we as we are? Are we off the hook? Very interesting issues and key indicators, including the declining inflation. But is that good reprieve for all of us? This is what Stella had to say.
I'll first start with the basics that inflation figures are released every month by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, which we call KNBS. And yes, inflation for the month of March came in at 5.7%. So this was a lower figure as compared to the 6.3% that was recorded in February. And that's where we get to see people saying that inflation is declining. But it does not mean that inflation went down. The 5.7% recorded in March technically shows that the general prices of both goods and services increased, but at a slower rate than what was recorded in the prior months. So, and this is an year-on-year figure. So we are comparing the general prices of goods and services in March of 2024 and the general prices of goods and services in March 2023.
Now, if we were to argue on those bases and the basis of the inflation rates coming out from the Central Bank of Kenya, putting it at 5.7%, how does this reflect in your pocket as a mwananchi?
Looking at the data by KNBS, the main contributing factor to the slower growth of inflation in the month of March, which we typically call disinflation in economic language, was a slowdown in the contributing factor was a slowdown in the increase in prices of food, transport costs, as well as the prices of household utilities. So household utilities include things like electricity, LPG gas, and other fuel like kerosene. So these three items that I've mentioned, that is the food prices, we have transport costs and household utilities, they account for 57% of the inflation basket. So this means that a slight decline in these particular items or even a slower growth is poised to affect the entire figure of inflation. So you might see other things or prices of other things rise in the economy, but if the prices of food or transport costs or household utilities decline, this is expected to have an impact on the entire figure as opposed to other products or other items. So these components or items are usually referred to as indices by KNBS. So we have the food index, we have the transport index, we have the household utilities index, and so on and so forth.
Now, let's come off the conversation about the economy for a second and look at the real economy on how you reflect on it when you're discussing money. This is what the dailies reported on how government is spending your money. And this is the national government and the county governments. Question is, are we off the hook?
One of the things that I'd really like to insist on is the issue on fiscal consolidation, and it's fiscal consolidation in terms of propping up revenues or boosting revenues, and at the same time cutting on expenditure. So we have all seen the new directive from the President of the Republic of Kenya telling all the state-owned enterprises to cut on their recurrent expenditure. So the question I always ask is, why not lead by example as the national government? Because you're telling the SOEs to cut down on their recurrent expenditure, yet you as the government, your recurrent expenditure and overall expenditure keeps on increasing and increasing every other fiscal year.
With this kind of expenditures, one will wonder, where are we headed as a country? Remember, we are planning to borrow another number of billions of dollars in the month of April. And these are the figures.
So you're borrowing to finance this recurrent expenditure that you're not willing to cut. And we hear day in, out every other time you see on newspaper headlines that the Auditor General, the Controller of Budget is saying that this was inflated. recurrent salaries on these particular people has been inflated, this and this is happening, we don't know where this recurrent expenditure is going, but nothing happens. And here we are, we keep saying we want fiscal consolidation, we want the government to cut on expenditure. So in my opinion, the biggest challenge that we are having as a country at this moment is the debt issue. We have so much debt and we keep on borrowing every day, and we are borrowing at higher rates because now rates are even very high, for example, in the domestic market. So we are borrowing, and we are not borrowing to put this money into development. We are borrowing to pay recurrent expenditure. Recurrent expenditure is the salaries and these other things like bills, electricity, and all that for the government. So what I mean is this money is not being put in economically viable projects, in that there's nothing that we will raise from this money. It's money we are borrowing to spend and not to spend on development. So 1, 2, 3, or a few years down the line, we will still be back here to pay debts that we did not put into viable projects, so we are not getting any profits from them. So we will either go back into our pockets in terms of using our revenues to pay these debts, or borrow like we did with the Eurobond buyback. Borrow to pay. And I agree with that comment that you made from someone on the comment section, in that we are borrowing Peter to pay John.
If I say I want only, Manu Chandari wanted 25%. I said I want only 10% of our annual tax revenue to be saved in the National Sovereign Wealth Fund. After that, we will identify other professionals. The fund can be very well managed. If we get somebody like Swakei from the banking industry, tumwambie ingia hapo kama board member, watch this fund. Credible people. Because the other excuse I've been hearing, hii ukianza leo itaibiwa. Is that the mentality we are going to have? Will we ever do anything if I come up with this proposal, itafanyika? If you propose this, haitawezekana because of this, watakula.
Still, we are having revenues lagging behind the prorated targets. And I still posit that even as we collect revenues for this fiscal year, I do not believe that the KRA will meet its revenue targets when the fiscal year comes to an end. But come June, you will see the Budget and Planning Committee come up with a budget. This is the expenditure that we are expecting to use in the next fiscal year, and these are the revenues. And you will see them having revenue targets higher than what we have in the fiscal year 2024, yet they did not meet what they had targeted for 2024 fiscal year. So in this case, these people this committee is just assuming that this didn't happen the last fiscal year. We are running on vibes, and inshallah, we are hoping we will raise this, but deep down they know we will not raise this figure.
President Ruto is almost 2 years into office, and some issues, including his choice of cabinet, has been on the lips and minds of many Kenyans. One wondering, and what were the qualifications being used to ascertain these members as its cabinet?
So
remember this conversation in Parliament?
Members to the cabinet. We have a choice to make either decision to reject over 60% of these names, or give President Ruto his skunk.
Did President Ruto get his skunk, or did President Ruto get his members of cabinet?
The recent thing that I've seen from David Ndei, who's the government chief advisor in economics, he was alluding to something called the sunspot. And that's the reason why we cannot explain how our economy is doing well, in quotes, because it's not following the fundamentals of economics. And I when I see that, and when you go and get the definition of it, it's just like a lucky chance opportunity that happens. And how that is the case, we're almost saying God, Mazi. It's the same way in Kenya. It's just that's what the chief economist is saying, is what he can explain.
Let's shift back to Kakamega County, where our health cabinet secretary, Nahumicha, was there. And she was talking on how it is important to intertwine sports and health. And she goes to note that it is actually cheaper to use what many of you will refer to as preventive healthcare approach. Now then again, we have no fields to play, or do we? Waliula. Now, this is what we had for you in a brief, and join us next week as we try to advance this conversation. My name is Lekyan Eli from Mizani Ustawi. Follow me at MIZANI254 at Ustawi254. You can equally follow my personal handle at Eli Lekyan.